Worthy is the Lamb. We start this service as we sing hymn 18 in English, hymn number 14 in Yoruba hymn book. Praise to the living God. Praise to the faithful one. All praise be his name. Who was, who is, and who is to be. Forever your name be praised. We gather in the presence of God Almighty to worship him in the beauty of his holiness. I welcome you all to the presence of God. And I pray that God, in his mercy, will accept our worship today in Jesus' name. This time around, the choir will be leading us in praise and worship.
Praise the Lord. Praise the living Jesus. Let us begin to wave our hands unto the Lord, for his mercy endureth forever. Lord, you are so good. Lord, you are kind. Lord, you are wonderful. My God, you are excellent. You are so good, Lord. Lord, you are kind. Lord, you are wonderful.
My God, you are excellent.
Excellent, excellent is your name. Baba, excellent is your power. God, you are wonderful.
My God, you are excellent.
Excellent, excellent is your name. Baba, excellent is your power. God, you are wonderful.
My God, you are excellent.
Torí pé ṣe àánú yìí dúró. Torí pé ṣe àánú yìí dúró. Torí pé ṣe, torí pé ṣe o. Torí pé ẹ ṣe àánú yìí dúró. Bàbá o.
Torí pé ṣe àánú yìí dúró.
Ayérayé ẹ ṣé o.
Torí pé
Ẹ ṣé àánú yìí dúró. Torí pé ẹ ṣé, torí pé ẹ ṣé o. Torí pé ẹ ṣé àánú yìí. Oh, ẹ̀yin ni bàbá tó tó bàbá, ẹ̀yin ni bàbá tó ju bàbá lọ.
ẹ̀yin ni bàbá tó tó bàbá, ẹ̀yin ni bàbá tó ju bàbá lọ.
Ẹ̀yin ni bàbá tó tó bàbá o, ẹ̀yin ni bàbá tó ju bàbá lọ.
Ẹ̀yin ni bàbá tó tó bàbá, ẹ̀yin ni bàbá tó ju bàbá lọ.
Ẹ̀yin ni bàbá bàbá tó tó ní ìgbà, ẹ̀yin ni bàbá tó tún ju gbogbo bàbá.
Ẹ̀yin ni bàbá
tó tó bàbá, ẹ̀yin ni bàbá tó ju bàbá lọ.
Praise the Lord, hallelujah. Praise the Lord, hallelujah. Praise the Lord, hallelujah. Praise the Lord, hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Ẹ̀yin Olúwa lógo hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Ẹ̀yin Olúwa lógo hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Ẹ̀yin Olúwa lógo hallelujah.
Nítorí pé Olúwa ẹ tóbi, ẹ tóbi, ẹ tóbi. Olúwa ẹ tóbi, ẹ tóbi bàbá, ẹ tóbi. Kò sẹ́ni ká lè fi ṣàkàwé rẹ̀ o, ẹ tóbi. Kò sẹ́ni ká lè fi ṣàkàwé rẹ̀ o, ẹ tóbi. Olúwa ẹ tóbi lọ́ba.
Olúwa ẹ tóbi o, ẹ tóbi.
Ayérayé o.
Olúwa ẹ tóbi o, ẹ tóbi. Kò sẹ́ni tá a lè fi ṣàkàwé rẹ̀ o, ẹ tóbi. Kò sẹ́ni tá a lè fi ṣàkàwé rẹ̀ o, ẹ tóbi. Olúwa.
Jehovah reigns.
Yes, yes.
Jehovah reigns.
Yes, yes.
Jehovah reigns.
Yes, yes.
You are lifted up
Above other gods.
lifted up.
Above other gods.
Papa, you are lifted up.
Above other gods.
Lifted up.
Above other gods.
And lifted up.
Above other gods.
Lifted up.
Above other gods.
Torí ọ̀pọ̀ ẹgbẹ́ mi ti kú. ṣègbè ẹlòmíràn ti wà lẹ́wọ̀n láì mọ̀ di àbájọ ọpẹ́. èmi kò lè ṣàìṣọpẹ́. èmi kò lè ṣàìṣọpẹ́. fòwe tí bàbá ṣe fún mi. èmi kò lè ṣàìṣọpẹ́. ó ní mo dá ọpẹ́ padà sọ́dọ̀ ẹ nítorí ọpẹ́ o. mo dá ọpẹ́ mi padà o sọ́dọ̀ ẹ nítorí ọpẹ́.
Please let us pray. Father, in Jesus' name, Lord, in the mighty name of Jesus Christ, the Alpha and Omega, beginning of all things, we praise your name this morning. The one who was, who is, and who is to come, we adore your holy name. We thank you, O Lord, for what you have done in our lives. We thank you, O Lord, for what you are doing presently. In faith, we are thanking you, O Lord, for what you are still going to do. We return all the praises back to you, ever-living God. We thank you for your protection. We thank you for your provision. We thank you even for sustaining us. Lord, accept our thanks in the mighty name of Jesus Christ. Here we are, acknowledging ourselves as sinners. Lord, we ask your infinite mercy that you look unto us from the throne of mercy as we genuinely confess our sin before you and ask for forgiveness, O Lord. Father, forgive us all our sins in the mighty name of Jesus Christ. Almighty God, as David said, that create in me a new heart and renew the contrite spirit within me. Lord, we have the Spirit of the living God, the Spirit that will teach us what to do even at the right time, the teach that will show us the way to you, O Lord, the Spirit that will lead us and guide us, that will make us to worship you in the way that our worship will be acceptable before your sight today. Lord, bestow your Spirit upon us in the mighty name of Jesus Christ. Of every being that will take one part or the other in this service, we cannot do anything without you. But with your Spirit, we can do all things. Lord, we ask for your Spirit, O Lord. Baba, release on us afresh in the mighty name of Jesus Christ. In this service today, O Lord, let all of us be blessed in the mighty name of Jesus Christ. Of everywhere that the tentacle of this networking service have reached, O Lord, we pray that your hands of blessing will reach every voice of this service in the mighty name of Jesus Christ. Lord, in this service, let there be deliverance. In this service, O Lord, let there be healing. Lord, we pray after this service, O Lord, we ask for the grace to return all the praises back to you, O Lord. Baba, release on us in the mighty name of Jesus Christ. Thank you, Lord, because you've answered our prayers. We worship your holy name. For we prayed in Jesus' name. The Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us the day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses.
Amen. The hymn, English hymn book 29. All things praise thee, Lord.
Time and space are praising thee. All things praise thee, Lord. May we. All things praise thee round our souls, and 10,000 tongues. Brothers, singers, chorus, praise. Glory, great and big voice sing. Lost in vain and only be. All things praise thee, Lord. May we. All things praise thee, high and low. Rain and dew and sun above. Praise on sunset, praise in dawn. Rain is stream and tempest loud. Summer, winter, unto thee. Glory, reign thy Lord. May we. All things praise thee, gracious Lord. Grace creator, powerful word. Omnipresent spirit now. And I feel thee omnibound. Lift our hearts in praise to thee. All things praise thee, Lord. May we.
The Old Testament reading is taken from the book Deuteronomy, chapter 7. We start reading from verse 6. Deuteronomy, chapter 7. We read from verse 6. For you are holy people to the Lord God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for himself, a special treasure above all the peoples in the face of the earth. The Lord did not set his love on you, nor choose you because you are more in number than any other people, for you were the least of all peoples. But because the Lord loves you, and because he would keep the oath which he swore to your fathers, the Lord has brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the house of bondage, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Therefore, know that the Lord your God, he is God, the faithful God who keeps covenant and mercy for 1,000 generations with those who love him and keep his commandments. And he repays those who hate him to their face, to destroy them. He will not be slack with him who hates him. He will repay him to his face. This is the word of God.
The Old Testament reading is taken from the Gospel according to John, chapter 14. Gospel according to John, chapter 14. We start reading from verse 15. John 14, we start reading from verse 15. If you love me, keep my commandments. And I will pray the Father, and he will give you another helper, that he may abide with you forever. The Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it neither sees him nor knows him, but you know him, for he dwells with you and will be in you. I will not leave you orphans. I will come to you. A little while longer, and the world will see me no more. But you will see me, because I live. You will live also. At that day, you will know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you. He who has my commandments and keeps them, it is he who loves me. And he who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will love him and manifest myself to him. This is the word of God.
Thanks be to God.
As we are preparing to listen to the word of God, we are going to sing hymn number 402. Hymn number 402.
Please let us pray. Father, in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Almighty God, we thank you for this hour. The hour has come to hear your word. Lord, we pray in the language that we will all understand. Speak yourself to all this morning in the mighty name of Jesus Christ.
Amen.
We pray, O Lord, that through your word, all of us will be blessed in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Thank you, Lord, because you've answered. For we prayed in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Praise the Lord.
Hallelujah.
Praise the mighty Jesus.
Hallelujah.
I want to return all the praises back to God Almighty
Mo fẹ́ dá gbogbo ìyẹn padà fún Ọlọ́run alágbára
for the grace that we enjoy in Him.
fún oore ọ̀fẹ́ tí a rí gbà nínú rẹ̀.
Despite all what is happening throughout the world,
Pẹ̀lú gbogbo ohun tó ń ṣẹlẹ̀ ní gbogbo àgbáyé,
God still keep us safe.
Ọlọ́run pa wá mọ́ síbẹ̀.
For this reason, we say, hallowed be thy
Fún
name.
ìdí èyí, a sọ wípé ọ̀wọ̀ ni fún orúkọ
I
rẹ̀.
also appreciate the opportunity that I'm having to be the mouthpiece of the Lord today.
Bákan náà, mo mọ rírì àǹfààní tí a fún mi láti jẹ́ ògbúfọ̀
And
Ọlọ́run
I'm
lónìí.
going to speak the mind of God.
Tí màá sì sọ ohun tí
I
Ọlọ́run
pray
fún wa.
that the speaker and the hearer of this word
Mo gbàdúrà wípé àti olùgbọ́ àti olùsọ
will be
ọ̀rọ̀ náà
blessed mightily in the mighty name of
gbogbo wa
Jesus.
láòdà lábùkún fún lórúkọ Jésù.
This morning,
Lówùúrọ̀ yìí,
what we want to ponder on
ohun tí a fẹ́ gbéyẹ̀wò,
is what I title the faithful God.
ohun tí mo pè ní Ọlọ́run olóòótọ́.
The faithful God.
Ọlọ́run olóòótọ́.
And our text is taken from Deuteronomy chapter 7 verse 9.
Ẹsẹ̀ wúrà wa la ó sì rí nínú ìwé Dítarónómì orí keje
I read
ẹsẹ̀
it here.
kẹsàn-án.
Now therefore know that the Lord thy God is God, the faithful God, which keepeth covenant and mercy with them that love him and keep his commandment to 1,000 generations. Praise the Lord.
Hallelujah.
Our God is a faithful God.
Ọlọ́run wa jẹ́ olóòótọ́.
All things in the world may change,
Ohun gbogbo ní àgbáyé lè yí padà.
but the faithfulness of our God never changes.
Ṣùgbọ́n Ọlọ́run wa tó jẹ́ olóòótọ́
He
kì í
is
yí padà.
faithful to his word.
Ó jẹ́ olóòótọ́ sí ọ̀rọ̀.
He is faithful to his covenant.
Ó jẹ́ olóòótọ́ sí májẹ̀mú.
He is faithful to his promises.
Ó jẹ́ olóòótọ́ sí ìlérí rẹ̀.
His promise to the descendant of Abraham
Ìlérí rẹ̀ sí ìran Abraham
is unchanging.
kò lè yí padà.
Is unfailing.
Kò lè yẹ̀ láé.
He is the one that he will fulfill forever.
Òun ni ó sì fìdí rẹ̀ múlẹ̀
The
títí
place
láé.
where we read in this Deuteronomy
Ibi tí a kà nínú ìwé
show us
Dítarónómì
that God loved the
ó
Israelites.
fi hàn wípé Ọlọ́run fẹ́ Israẹli.
We can see the way he related with them even when they are in the
A rí
wilderness.
bí ó ṣe bá wọn lò pàápàá nígbà tí wọ́n wà ní
Even when they are in the captive in Egypt.
pàápàá nígbà tí wọ́n wà ní ilẹ̀
The way
ní
he
Íjíbítì.
brought them out.
Bí Ọlọ́run ti mú wọn jáde.
The way he treated them.
Bó ṣe ń tọ́jú wọn.
And the covenant that he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Àti májẹ̀mú tí ó bá Abraham.
All
Isaac
these
àti
covenants
Jacob.
still stand still.
Gbogbo májẹ̀mú yìí ó dúró títí
And
láé.
what God is expecting of those fathers of the faith
Ohun tí Ọlọ́run béèrè lọ́wọ́ gbogbo àwọn bàbá
is for
ìgbàgbọ́.
them to love him in return
Òun ni wípé kí a fẹ́
and to keep his
ká sì
commandments.
pa òfin rẹ̀ mọ́.
It is also the same in this present world.
Ó tún rí bẹ́ẹ̀ náà ní àkókò tí a
To
wà yìí.
all the believers throughout the world.
Fún gbogbo
The
onígbàgbọ́
present
káàkiri
situation
àgbáyé.
in the world have changed so many things.
Pàápàá ní àkókò tẹ ohun tó ń ṣẹlẹ̀ ó ti yí ohun gbogbo
So
padà.
many people's perspective about Jesus Christ, about God have changed.
Ìran àwọn ènìyàn èròǹgbà àwọn bí Ọlọ́run ṣe jẹ́ sí wọn ó ti yí
Many
padà.
have turned totally to God for salvation,
Ọlọ́run àwọn ẹlòmíràn ti yí padà sí Ọlọ́run fún ìgbàlà.
but some have turned outrightly against him.
Àwọn mìíràn tiẹ̀ ti ṣe lòdì sí i.
But the question is,
Ṣùgbọ́n ìbéèrè náà ni wípé
does that change the personality of God?
ǹjẹ́ eléyìí yí Ọlọ́run padà
Does
sí?
that change the faithfulness of God?
Ǹjẹ́ eléyìí yí òtítọ́ Ọlọ́run
God
padà
has
sí?
never broken his covenant,
Ọlọ́run kì í da májẹ̀mú rẹ̀.
and he will never break it.
Kò sì ní í dà á láé.
It's only man that breaks covenant with God.
Ènìyàn ni ó máa ń da májẹ̀mú pẹ̀lú
Many a
Ọlọ́run.
times we sin against him,
Ọ̀pọ̀lọpọ̀ ìgbà là ń ṣẹ̀
but
sí i.
his faithfulness endures forever.
Ṣùgbọ́n òtítọ́ rẹ̀ wà títí láé.
Either we fail him or not,
bóyá ajá kulẹ̀ tàbí
God will still remain the faithful God.
Ọlọ́run yóò jẹ́ olóòótọ́
In the
síbẹ̀.
book of Jeremiah 29 verse 11,
Nínú ìwé Jeremiah orí
God said, I know the thought that I'm thinking
ó
towards
ní
you.
mo mọ èrò tí mo ní sí
He
yín.
said the thought is the thought of peace.
Èrò mi èrò àlàáfíà
It's not the thought of evil,
kò ń ṣe èrò ibi
to give you an expected
láti
end.
fún yín ní ọjọ́ iwájú
His
tó lógo.
faithfulness is unlimited.
Òtítọ́ rẹ̀ kò lódiwọ̀n.
According to David in Psalm 36,
Gẹ́gẹ́ bí Dáfídì ti kọ́nu Sáàmù orí kẹta
verse 5.
rídí ní
He
ogójì.
said, your love, O Lord,
Ìfẹ́ rẹ Olúwa
reach to the heavens.
ó dé ọ̀run.
Your faithfulness
Òtítọ́ rẹ
even to the skies.
ó dé àwọsánmọ̀.
Brethren,
Ará,
God was faithful in the past.
Ọlọ́run jẹ́ olóòótọ́ ní
He
àtijọ́.
is still faithful even presently.
Ó sì tún jẹ́ olóòótọ́ ní
And
àkókò tí
he
ó
will
wà.
be faithful in the future.
Yóò sì jẹ́ olóòótọ́ ní ọjọ́
In a time
iwájú.
like this, brethren,
Nínú àkókò bí èyí
many
ará,
things have changed.
ọ̀pọ̀lọpọ̀ ohun ló ti ṣe.
Economy of the world have changed.
Ètò ọrọ̀ ajé ti yí padà.
Ministry have changed.
Iṣẹ́ ìránṣẹ́ ti yí padà.
Policies have changed.
Ọ̀nà bí a ṣe ń ṣe kan pàápàá ti yí padà.
Societies have changed.
Àwùjọ pàápàá ti
Even
yí
the
padà.
freedom and right of some people have been restricted.
Òmìnira àti ẹ̀tọ́ àwọn ènìyàn kò lè
But the
borí bó ṣe yẹ
faithfulness
kó rí.
of God endures forever.
Ṣùgbọ́n òtítọ́ Ọlọ́run wà títí
With
láé.
the believers,
Pẹ̀lú onígbàgbọ́,
those who believe in God,
àwọn tí wọ́n ní ìgbàgbọ́
all
nínú
these things that is
Ọlọ́run,
happening
gbogbo ohun tó ń ṣẹlẹ̀
is
yìí,
just the test of time.
ó jẹ́ ohun tí a fi ń dán wa wò.
Our act,
Ọkàn wa,
our action,
ìṣe wa,
our reaction
àti bí a ṣe ń ṣe
is
sí.
what God want to see.
Òun ni Ọlọ́run fẹ́ wò ní àkókò
How are
yìí.
we reacting to this pandemic period?
Báwo la ṣe ń ṣe sí ohun tí a là kọjá ní
COVID-19
àkókò
can
yìí?
never change the faithfulness of God.
Pàápàá jùlọ àrùn tá à ń polówó tí
So
ò
it's
gbógun
supposed
kò lè
not to
yí
stop
òtítọ́
you
Ọlọ́run.
as well.
Eléyìí ò gbọdọ̀ dá ọ dúró
It's
títí.
supposed not to change you
Kò gbọdọ̀ yí ọ
for
padà
being faithful to God
láti jẹ́
and
olóòótọ́
even
sí
to
Ọlọ́run
obey His commandments.
àti láti pa òfin rẹ̀ mọ́.
As we all know,
Bí gbogbo wa ti mọ̀,
what we need in this time
ohun tí a nílò ní
is to
àkókò yìí
allow the free flow operation of the Spirit of God.
láti gba ẹ̀mí Ọlọ́run
To
láàyè láti
allow
rìn
the
láàrin
Spirit
wa.
of God to lead and direct us.
Láti jẹ́ kí ẹ̀mí Ọlọ́run kó
If
darí
you
kó
consider
tọ́ wa.
the place we read in the New Testament,
Tí a bá wo ibi tí a kà nínú
Gospel
májẹ̀mú
according to
láéláé.
John,
Májẹ̀mú titun ìwé
we
Jòhánù
read chapter 14.
orí kẹrìnlá.
We start from 15 downward.
A rẹ̀ láti ẹsẹ̀ kẹẹ̀ẹ́dógún sí
This is the
ìsàlẹ̀.
fulfillment of the faithfulness of God to the mankind.
Eléyìí ni ìfìdímúlẹ̀ jíjẹ́
The
olóòótọ́ Ọlọ́run sí
faithfulness
àwọn
of
ènìyàn.
God is fulfilled in the promises
Ọlọ́run jẹ́ olóòótọ́
That-
láti mú ìlérí rẹ̀
that He
ṣẹ.
will not leave us in
Pé
desolate.
kò ní fi wá
He
sílẹ̀.
said He will not leave us
Kọjá.
an orphan.
Ó ní kò ní fi wá sílẹ̀
He will
kí
not
aláìní
leave us
bàbá.
unattended to.
Pé kò ní fi wá sílẹ̀ láì
That
yà
is
sí
why He
wa.
said He will promise the comforter.
Ìdí nìyí tó fi sọ wípé òun yóò rán
That is
olùtùnú.
the Spirit of God.
Èyí ni ẹ̀mí
This
Ọlọ́run.
Spirit will walk with us in this Christian journey.
Ẹ̀mí mímọ́ yìí yóò bá wa rìnrìn àjò
This
ìgbàgbọ́ wa.
Spirit is the one that will assist us even in this trial period.
Òun pàápàá ni ó ràn wá lọ́wọ́ nírú àkókò
This
tí ń
Spirit
là
is the
kọjá
one
yìí.
that will counsel us when we are facing
Ẹ̀mí
difficulty.
yìí ni ó jẹ́ olùdámọ̀ràn nígbà tí a
Is
bá ń la ohun
this
tó le
Spirit
kọjá.
also that will empower us when we are weak?
Ẹ̀mí yìí pàápàá ni ó fún wa ní agbára
This
nígbà tí ó bá
Spirit is the
tí àárẹ̀
plan
bá
and
mú wa.
promise of God to save the mankind.
Ẹ̀mí yìí ni ètò Ọlọ́run láti
It's
gba
the
ayé
one
là.
that will give us the eternal rest with Him.
Òun ni yóò fún wa ní ìsinmi ayé
Let me
láyé.
quickly remind us
Jẹ́ kí n rán wa létí
that the faithfulness of God
pé jíjẹ́ olóòótọ́
can
Ọlọ́run
only work for those who are friends with Jesus.
ó lè ṣiṣẹ́ fún iye àwọn tó
Those
ti
who
ń bá
are
Jésù
friends
rìn.
with His only begotten Son.
Àwọn tí wọ́n ti dá ọ̀rẹ́ pọ̀ pẹ̀lú ọmọ
Those
rẹ̀
who
Jésù Kristi.
abide with the do's and don'ts of Jesus Christ.
Àwọn ẹni tí ó ń pa ṣíṣe
Those who
ṣe
are
Kristi
ready
mọ́.
to keep the commandments of God.
Àwọn tí wọ́n ṣetán láti pa wọ́n jẹ̀ mọ́
Listen
Ọlọ́run
to
mọ́.
what that John Gospel says.
Gbọ́ ohun tí ìre Jòhánù wí
Verse 15.
ẹsẹ̀ kẹẹ̀ẹ́dógún.
He said, if you love me,
Tí ẹ̀yin bá fẹ́ràn mi,
keep my
ẹ
commandments.
pa òfin mi mọ́.
These same statements were repeated in chapter 15 verse 14.
Ọ̀rọ̀ yìí kan náà látún rí ní ẹsẹ̀
it
kẹẹ̀ẹ́dógún
was changed.
kẹrìnlá ayí.
He said, you are my friend
Ó ní ọ̀rẹ́ mi ni ẹ̀yin
if you do what I command
tí
you.
ẹ bá pa ohun tí mo pa
What you
láṣẹ fún
need
yín
as
mọ́.
children of God
Ohun tí o nílò gẹ́gẹ́ bí ọmọ
is to
Ọlọ́run
faithfully keep commandment of God.
láti pa òfin Ọlọ́run mọ́
And
ní
by so
tòótọ́.
doing,
Nípa ṣíṣe èyí,
you will be saved.
a ó sì gbà ọ́ là.
The plan of the devil,
Ètò Sátánì,
the power and principalities of this world
agbára àti ipa ayé yìí,
is to cancel the coming together of the children of
òun ni
God.
láti fagilé àbí
Is to
ìdarapọ̀ ọmọ
cancel
Ọlọ́run.
the coming together of the children of God in the church.
Láti fagilé dídarapọ̀ àwọn ọmọ Ọlọ́run
But
nínú
in
ìjọ.
the contrary,
Ṣùgbọ́n ó lòdì.
But in the
ní
contrary,
ìlòdì sí
God used this great opportunity
Ọlọ́run lo àǹfààní ńlá yìí
to open branches of church in every home.
láti ṣe ìpèsè
I know as I'm
nínú
speaking
gbogbo
right
ilé.
here,
Mo mọ̀ pé bí mo ṣe ń sọ̀rọ̀ ní
the word has gone through the ear
ọ̀rọ̀ náà ti jáde lọ sínú
and
afẹ́fẹ́
is meeting you at your home.
ó sì ń bá ọ nínú ilé rẹ.
The devil plan have changed
Ètò Sátánì ó ti yí
because
padà
he want to cancel the church.
ṣùgbọ́n ó fẹ́ fagilé ilé
But God
ìjọsìn.
used this opportunity to create and open branches of church in every
ṣùgbọ́n
home.
Ọlọ́run lò ó láti gbé ìjọ dìde nínú ilé
This is the
oníkálukú.
fulfillment of prophecies of God.
Èyí ni ìmúṣẹ àsọtẹ́lẹ̀
As it's
Ọlọ́run.
documented in Act of Apostle chapter 1 verse 8.
Bí a ti rí àkọsílẹ̀ nínú iṣẹ́
He
àwọn
said, you
orí
shall
kẹsàn-án
receive
kẹsàn-án.
power.
Ẹ̀yin yóò gba agbára.
He said, you shall receive
Ó ní
power.
ẹ̀yin yóò gba
When
agbára.
the Spirit of the Lord has come upon you,
Nígbà tí ẹ̀mí Ọlọ́run bá
then you
pàdé
will
yín.
bear the witness
Ẹ̀yin yóò ṣe ẹlẹ́rìí
in Jerusalem,
ní Jerusalem,
in Judea,
ní Judea,
in Samaria,
ní Samaria
even to the end of the world.
àti ní gbogbo òpin
The
ayé.
Jerusalem is your home.
Jerusalem yìí ni ilé
When you
rẹ
have
àti ilé rẹ.
received the Spirit of the living
Nígbà
God,
tó ti gba ẹ̀mí
then the
Ọlọ́run,
power will endue you
then
now.
a ó fi agbára kún ọ.
Then you will bear the witness of God.
Wàá máa jẹ́
Then you will
ẹlẹ́rìí.
bear the witness of God.
Wàá jẹ́ ẹlẹ́rìí.
God has forfeited the plans of devil.
Ọlọ́run ti ba ìmọ̀ Sátánì jẹ́.
Brethren, I want to purge you.
Ara mo fẹ́ rọ̀ wá,
Brethren, I want to beseech you
mo sì fẹ́ bẹ̀ wá.
that the faithfulness and steadfastness of our God
Pé òtítọ́ àti ìdúróṣinṣin Ọlọ́run wa
never changes.
kò yí padà rárá.
The world may change,
Ayé lè yí padà o,
but God will not change.
ṣùgbọ́n Ọlọ́run kò yí
He
padà.
will remain the faithful God.
Yóò sì máa jẹ́ Ọlọ́run olóòtú.
Friend will fail you.
Ọ̀rẹ́ á já ọkulẹ̀.
Definitely friend will fail you.
Ọ̀rẹ́ á kọ̀ ọ́ sílẹ̀.
Judas failed Jesus Christ.
Júdásì pàápàá tan Jésù jẹ.
Ahithophel failed David.
Àìtófẹ́lì pàápàá jáde
Family will fail you as
ẹbí
well.
pàápàá yóò já ọkulẹ̀ bí.
Absalom raised against his father.
Absalomu pàápàá dìde lòdì sí
Even
bàbá rẹ̀.
money may fail you.
Owó pàápàá lè já
In the
ọkulẹ̀.
recent time,
Ní àkókò yìí,
in
ní àkókò tí
we
a wà yìí,
notice that the rich people, even in Italy,
a rí pé àwọn olówó àwọn ọlọ́lá
they
ní
are throwing
orílẹ̀-èdè
their money
Italy
into the
wọ́n
streets
wá ń ju owó wọn sí
because their
àwùjọ
riches has failed them.
nítorí pé ọrọ̀ wọn ti já wọn
Feelings,
kulẹ̀.
emotional feelings may fail you.
Ìmọ̀lára pàápàá lè já
I
ní
love
kulẹ̀.
you till the end, till the death do of us
Mo
may
fẹ́
fail
ọ
you.
títí tí ikú yóò fi yà wá.
Don't forget in a hurry
Má gbàgbé pé ní ìkánjú.
what happened between Samson and Delilah.
Má gbàgbé ohun tó ṣẹlẹ̀ láàrin Sánsónì
Even
àti
the
Dẹ̀lílà.
government will fail you as well.
Ìjọba pàápàá já ọkulẹ̀.
Take a deep look of the governance of this country as well.
Pàápàá ẹ jẹ́ ká wo àwọn adarí wa.
Brethren, the only person that cannot fail you
Ẹnìkan ṣoṣo tí ò lè já ọkulẹ̀.
is God,
Òun ni Ọlọ́run.
that faithful one,
Ọlọ́run
the
olóòótọ́.
one that is faithful to his word,
Ẹni tó jẹ́ olóòótọ́ sí
the
ọ̀rọ̀
one
rẹ̀.
that is faithful to his way,
Ẹni tó jẹ́ olóòótọ́ ní ọ̀nà
he is
rẹ̀.
faithful to his
Ó
commandments,
jẹ́ olóòótọ́ sí
and
òfin
he is
rẹ̀.
faithful to all his
Ó
promises.
sì jẹ́ olóòótọ́ sí gbogbo ìlérí
The
rẹ̀.
only thing and the way to react to his faithfulness
Ọ̀nà kan ṣoṣo tí a fi lè fi òtítọ́ rẹ̀ hàn.
is one,
Òun ni wípé àkọ́kọ́
walking with him,
bá a rìn,
walking with him,
rírìn pẹ̀lú rẹ̀,
and working for him.
máa ṣiṣẹ́ fún un.
The last one is worshiping him.
Èyí tó gbẹ̀yìn rẹ̀ ni wípé máa
You need
sìn
to
ín.
walk with God
Ó
continuously.
gbọ́dọ̀ máa bá a rìn nígbà gbogbo.
Abraham walked with the Lord.
Ábúráhámù bá Ọlọ́run rìn.
Enoch walked with the Lord.
Énọ́kù bá Ọlọ́run rìn.
And you need to walk for
Ó
God.
sì gbọ́dọ̀ ṣiṣẹ́ fún Ọlọ́run.
Apostle Paul walked for God
Àpọ́sítélì Pọ́ọ̀lù ṣiṣẹ́ fún
and
Ọlọ́run.
he received the reward.
Ó sì gba èrè rẹ̀.
And you need to worship him.
Ó gbọ́dọ̀ máa sìn
He is
ín.
the only one that you must worship.
Òun nìkan ló yẹ kó o sìn.
The children of the Israelites,
Àwọn ọmọ Ísírẹ́lì
they worship other God.
wọ́n yin Ọlọ́run
But
mìíràn.
at this period of time in
Wọ́n
their
ní
lives,
irú àkókò yìí nínú ayé
they
wọn.
face so many troubles.
Ọ̀pọ̀lọpọ̀
But the
ìpèníjà
moment
ni
they
wọ́n.
come back to God,
Nígbà tí wọ́n bá padà tọ̀
they
Ọlọ́run wa,
receive the reward.
wọ́n wá gba èrè wọn.
Brethren,
Ará,
walk with God,
bá Ọlọ́run rìn.
walk for God,
Ṣiṣẹ́ fún Ọlọ́run.
and worship him.
Kó o sì máa
So
sìn.
that his faithfulness
Tí òdodo rẹ̀
will work for you.
yóò sì ṣiṣẹ́ fún
Shall
ọ.
we bow down our
Ẹ
heads?
jẹ́ ká tẹrí wa bá fún
As we
àdúrà
pray.
bí a ti ń gbàdúrà.
Lord, we thank you for your word that has gone forth. We know that the word will be planted and bear much fruit in the life of the hearers. Lord, as we hear your word today, we pray that your faithfulness will work for all of us in the name of God the Father
Amen.
and of the Son
Amen.
and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen.
thanks to God Almighty for making it possible for us to see another Sunday. We have to thank God that majority of us at this point in time, we are able to go to work, to perform our work, to perform our duty, and also almost all the banking sectors are now working. So anybody who wants to pay his tithe, his collection, should please look at the screen. The account number is on the screen so that we will pay it to the appropriate bank. While also those of us who are nearer to us who cannot go to bank, the stewards are around, the presbyter are around, always in the church. And therefore, if you want to pay your tithe, if you want to pay your collection, you please pay it to the stewards, and they will make sure that all necessary records are put down for you. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Holy, holy, holy Lord God of hosts, heaven and earth are full of your glory. Hosanna in the highest. Lord, we give praises. Lord, we give thanks to you for making it possible for us to see another day. Thank you, Lord, for your protection. Thank you, Lord, for your care. Thank you, Lord, for your innumerable blessings. Thank you, Lord, for the eyes that can see. Thank you, Lord, for the mouth that can praise you. Thank you, Lord, for the food we eat. Thank you, Lord, for sustaining us up to this day. Our God and our Father, accept our praises in Jesus' name.
Amen.
At this point in time, we realize our transgressions, we realize our iniquities, we realize our shortcoming. We realize that we have short forth of the glory where we have sinned against you. Almighty and everlasting God, forgive us our sins in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Unchanged God, we want you to be with us. We want you to protect us. Lord, at this time in which the entire world is facing a pandemic disease called COVID-19, I commit all of you in this sanctuary and all of us watching us this morning, that none of us will die of the coronavirus in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Adequate hands of the Lord, adequate protection of the Lord will be upon each and every one of us in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Olúwa fi ọpẹ́ àti ìyìn fún wa gbé ọ̀gá nítorí pé o tún ṣọjọ́ òní lọ́jọ́ ayọ̀. Òṣòjọ́ òní lọ́jọ́ ìbùkún, àgbé apá ṣe é gbé, aláhùn wa gbòòrò ṣe sọ̀rọ̀. Ọba tí ń tẹ́wọ́ gbọ́ ọpẹ́, Olúwa mọ́sá tẹ́wọ́ gbọ́ ọpẹ́ wa.
Àmín.
Ọba tí ń tẹ́wọ́ gbà yín, Olúwa mọ́sá tẹ́wọ́ gbà yín wa.
Àmín.
Bàbá, nítorí pé a rí pé àlégbẹ́rù wa dórí la tún padà wá lónìí. Bàbá, ìwọ lọba tí dárí ẹ̀ṣẹ̀ jì ni, akónimọ́ra fẹ̀ṣẹ̀ jì ni. Olódùmarè, dárí ẹ̀ṣẹ̀ wa jì wá.
Àmín.
Ẹ̀mí mímọ́, dárí ẹ̀ṣẹ̀ wa jì wá.
Àmín.
Olúwa, ogun tí ń jà ní Sàmánì yìí, bàbá, àìsàn tí ń jà ní Sàmánì yìí, Olúwa, ó ní ẹni tó bá gbẹ́kẹ̀lé ọ dàbí òkè Síónì tí a kò lè sí nídìí tó dúró láéláé. Lágbára Ọlọ́run, àṣà yóò ní kó wa lọ o.
Àmín Jésù.
Ìdààmú ayé ò ní manú lé wa.
Àmín.
Wàhálà ayé ò ní manú lé wa.
Àmín.
Ogun COVID-19 kò ní manú lé wa o.
Àmín Jésù.
Bàbá, iṣẹ́ wa dọwọ́ rẹ. Adúpẹ́ o, púpọ̀ àwọn èèyàn ń lọ bí iṣẹ́ lásìkò yìí. Bàbá mi àti Ọlọ́run mi, wọ́n ń lọ láti lọ wá jíjẹ, láti lọ wá mímu, láti lọ wá níná, láti lọ wá lílò. Ní orúkọ Jésù, ẹ ò ní pàdé àgbákò.
Àmín Jésù.
Àgbákò ò ní pàdé yín.
Àmín.
And all those who are sick, Lord, you are God of deliverance and you are God of miracles. Father, at this point in time, we commit them into your care. Lay your healing hands upon them.
Amen.
Lay your healing hands upon them.
Amen.
Those who are sick, Lord, they need deliverance. Those who are suffering from COVID-19, who are in a various quarantine area, Lord, we pray that your spirit, Lord, will heal them in Jesus' name.
Amen.
The fire of the Holy Spirit belongs to you. And wherever they are being affected by any sickness, my God and my Father, heal them in Jesus' name.
Amen.
I commit all of you watching us at home and those of you who are in the church. The Lord will bless each and every one of us.
Amen.
The Lord will protect us.
Amen.
The Lord will protect us. The Lord will strengthen us.
Amen.
We will move from glory to glory.
Amen.
We will move from strength to strength.
Amen.
And it will be well with you.
Amen.
I soak all of you in the blood of Jesus.
Blood of
None
Jesus.
of you will die prematurely in Jesus' name.
Amen.
None of you will die prematurely in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Long life in joy, long life in happiness, long life in goodness, long life in the mercy of the Lord. will accomplish each and every one of you.
Amen.
Thank you, wonderful Jesus. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. Thank you for the price you paid, bearing all my sins and shame. In love you came and gave amazing grace. Thank you for the love. Thank you for the nail patient, washing in your cleansing flow. And now I know your forgiveness and the grace. What is the Lamb seated on the throne, crowning our with many crown, you reign victorious. I am lifted up, Jesus, Son of God, the treasures of heaven crucified. What is the Lamb? What is the Lamb?
Father, we thank you for your presence among us in this service today. We bless your holy name because you are the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. We bless you even for the message you have sent to the world at this time, even more than anybody can interpret. Father, we plead that your Holy Spirit will follow the message into our heart and give deeper interpretation in the mighty name of Jesus.
Amen.
As we are going in this new week, Lord, we say we have no power of our own. We have no strength of our own. Father, we hide before your throne, before the shadow of Almighty God. Father, go with us.
Amen.
In everything that we are going to do, direct all our activities.
Amen.
Father, we pray that this new week, you will meet us at the point of our need in the mighty name of Jesus.
Amen.
No evil, Lord, no evil will befall any of us in the mighty name of Jesus.
Amen.
Father, once again, we commit the medical personnel into your fatherly care, that they are doing all these things in order to cure those people who are affected by this COVID-19. Lord, we pray that you will cover them with your blood and protect them from all these virus in the mighty name of Jesus.
Amen.
As we go with us, O Lord.
Amen.
Guide us, O Lord.
Amen.
Let your presence every time be with us.
Amen.
In the name of God the Father,
Amen.
God the Son,
Amen.
and God the Holy Spirit. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit rest and abide with us and our people wherever they may be this day, even forevermore. Amen. Worthy is the Lamb of God.
Hallelujah.
Amen.
Lord. tó dé bá.